I've never been one to scare easily, but there's one Halloween night I can't forget. One that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. So before we dive back into the story, take a second to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss more real, spine-chilling stories based on true experiences. Let's keep the suspense alive together. It was a few years ago, Halloween night, and I had just moved to a quiet suburban neighborhood. My friends convinced me to stay home, saying I could relax, maybe hand out candy to trick-or-treaters. That sounded harmless enough, so I decided to make it a cozy night in, alone, with some good horror movies lined up. Around 6 p.m., kids started showing up in costumes, running up and down the street, laughing, bags already heavy with candy. I enjoyed seeing their costumes, some cute, some creepy, all just part of the Halloween fun. But sometime after 9 p.m., the crowd thinned out and the street grew quiet. I noticed the change. Even the distant laughter and chatter had faded away. I turned off my porch light, signaling I was done for the night, and settled into my couch. But then, just as I got comfortable, I heard it. A faint knock on my door. It startled me. It was late and no one else was out, but figuring it was maybe an older kid or someone running late, I got up, half annoyed, and went to answer. When I opened the door, I expected to see a teenager in some thrown-together costume, but standing there was a man. No costume, no bag for candy, just standing in the dark. His clothes looked a bit worn, like he'd been out all day, and he wore this faded hoodie with the hood pulled up. His face was mostly in shadow, but I could see enough to know he was probably in his 40s, maybe older. "Trick or treat?" he asked, in this slow, almost mocking tone. It didn't sound like a joke, but more like he was testing me. I forced a polite smile, even though I felt a prickle of unease. I think you're a bit too old for trick-or-treating, I said, trying to sound lighthearted. He didn't respond. He just kept standing there, staring at me with this odd intensity. There was something unsettling about his gaze. It wasn't the look of someone playing a harmless prank. It was more invasive, like he was studying me or sizing me up. The silence stretched out, and I felt my pulse quicken. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Do you live here alone?" That question sent a shiver through me. Why would he need to know that? I lied without hesitation. "No, actually, my boyfriend's inside," I said, keeping my tone steady. I even glanced over my shoulder as if he were just out of sight, but when I looked back, the man's expression hadn't changed. After a few seconds, he nodded, as if he'd learned what he came for, and turned to walk away. I shut the door quickly, locking it, and then double-checking the other locks on my windows. I tried to shake off the encounter, but I couldn't relax. My heart was still racing. I went to the front window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside, and that's when I saw him again. He hadn't left. He was standing across the street, half hidden by a tree, watching my house. The dim streetlight cast shadows across his face, but I could still see his eyes focused directly on my window. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just some odd guy. Maybe he'd been drinking and would wander off soon enough. But as the minutes ticked by, he didn't budge. He just kept staring at my house, completely motionless. I decided I wasn't going to wait around to see what he'd do next. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, trying to keep my voice calm as I explained what was happening. She told me to call the police, but I hesitated. I mean, he hadn't done anything, technically, but something deep down told me this wasn't right. So I dialed the non-emergency line, just in case. I told the operator about the man outside, and she assured me they'd send someone to check it out. I stayed on the phone with my friend, pacing back and forth, my eyes darting to the window every few seconds. The minutes felt like hours, but finally, I saw the flash of blue and red lights down the street. The man didn't move. He just kept watching. As the police car pulled up, he turned and walked slowly into the shadows, disappearing between houses. The officers came to my door, and I explained everything that happened, but it felt surreal saying it out loud, like maybe I was overreacting. The police did a quick sweep of the area, but they didn't find him. One of the officers gave me his card and told me to call if I saw anything suspicious. I thanked them, but deep down, I knew the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away so easily. After the officers left, I stayed on the couch, watching the windows, trying to convince myself it was over. The rest of the night passed slowly, every creak and shadow in my house making my heart jump. I finally drifted off around dawn, clutching my phone, too exhausted to care anymore. The next few days, I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning crowds, feeling watched, even when I was alone. Just when I thought maybe I was fine finally moving on, I came across a news article that made my blood run cold. A man matching the stranger's description had been arrested just a few towns over. He'd been targeting women, following them home, and waiting for the right moment to break in. The police had caught him when one of his intended victims escaped, running to a neighbor's house to call for help. My hands shook as I read the article, piecing together the horrific possibility that if I hadn't called the police, I might have been next. Even now, I sometimes think back to that Halloween night, remembering his face, his eyes, that strange, twisted smile. Part of me wonders how close I came to a nightmare I might not have survived. Now, every Halloween, I make sure I'm not alone, double-checking every lock, every window, and telling myself I'll never forget the lesson I learned. Sometimes the real monsters don't hide behind masks. They stand right there in front of you, waiting, watching, just close enough to remind you of the danger that hides in plain sight.